Um, Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on the growing preference of Canadians for ever larger vehicles. I am Marc-André Viau, Head of Government Relations, and I'm with Équiterre, and I'm honored to host this virtual panel to launch Équiterre's study on this alarming trend. This extensive research project is conducted in collaboration with Polytechnique Montreal's Mobility Chair, HEC Montréal, and the Cyrano Research Center, which brings together researchers from all Quebec universities. Today, we offer an overview of various aspects relating to the increase in large full fuel and efficient vehicles in Canada. First, we'll explore this trend and try to understand it. We are then going to explore the various levers that exists to reverse it and make sure that we work efficiently towards our climate targets. So here is the webinar agenda for the next 2 hours. We will discuss the transformation of the vehicle fleet and its impact on society by looking back on the evolution of the supply and demand of light-duty vehicle in the previous decades. That will be with Brigitte Millard of Polytechnique Montreal's Mobility Chair. We will then move on to car advertising practices in Canada, as well as policy solution to better regulate them. And that is with Andréane Brazeau, our mobility analyst at Équiterre. Following that presentation, we will move on to the result of a Canada-wide survey, interviews and focus groups that thoroughly explored SUV purchase motivations. And that section is with Verena Gruber from HEC Montréal. And then we'll move on to the various consequences that the rising number of light-duty trucks brings. That section is with Catherine Morancy and Brigitte Millard from Polytechnique Montréal. And lastly, we will discuss the policy solution that exists and that could potentially help reversing the trend towards large fuel and efficient vehicle. We've set aside a significant amount of time for our group discussion and a Q&A at the end of the webinar. Throughout the presentation, feel free to ask your question in the Q&A chat box. We will try to answer some of them along the way, but there will be more time at the end to answer your questions also. We'll also take a 5-minute breaks after the first hour. So let's start with a quick reminder of Équiterre's expertise on transportation issues. In the field of passenger transportation, we operate on 2 levels. First one is reducing the size of the car fleet through work on source reduction and modal transfer. And the second one is improving the automobile fleet in terms of energy and material efficiency. And in 3 main areas as well: mobilization, awareness, and influence. The slide you can see now presents the key issue that we work on. But you're not here to listen to me. You're here to hear the experts. So let's start with the first one, my colleague Andréane Brazeau, who's in charge of coordinating our study.
Thank you, Marc-André. Good afternoon, everyone. I am very pleased and very excited to present the results of our 2-year-long. I still haven't. Yeah. Sorry, of our 2-year-long Canada-wide study on the rising number of light-duty trucks. So when we say light-duty trucks, we talk about SUVs and pickup trucks, as well as crossovers, depending on the specific aspect that we're analyzing or the classification, but my collaborators will elaborate on that later. Now, a few words about this project's ecosystem. So as mentioned, this study is led by Équiterre in collaboration with the Cyrano Research Center, HEC, and Polytechnique Montréal. And we are happy to have co-researchers from these organizations with us today. I'd also like to mention that except for Marc-André, this panel brings together women experts in the field of transport. So I'm quite happy about that. And next, for those of you who are here because of our Limitless report on advertising practices, this is just the tip of the iceberg, because as you can see, we'll be exploring several other areas. The other reports will be coming out in the next couple of days, so stay tuned. And I would also like to point out that the research is funded by Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. Now let's get to the heart of the matter. So our research starts with a very simple observation. Our vehicles are getting bigger and heavier, and Canada is no exception to this trend that we can see worldwide. The popularity of light-duty trucks is undeniable, and basically they are taking over the Canadian fleet, and very quickly. In the last 30 years, their number has increased by 280%. And of course, this increase has various impacts on many aspects of society. And I'd like to mention that the transportation sector is one of the few sectors where GHG emissions are still increasing with the energy sector, and they're kind of related if we talk about the fuel aspect. And this is mainly due to the transportation of goods and the increase in light duty trucks. So it is a major problem, and their impact is pretty much that enormous. So that's where we start from. Back to you, Marc-André.
Thank you, Andréane. We want to make things interesting for you guys. So we have some interactive poll questions, and it's time for the first question. In 2020, what do you think was the market share of light-duty trucks sold in Canada? The bracket choices should appear on your screen, and I'll give you 15 seconds to submit your guess. The choices are between 30 and 45%, 45 and 60%, 60 and 75%, or 75 and 90%. It's your turn. And we have some interesting results here. Basically 24% of people who answered the survey were right. The answer is in the bracket between 75 and 90%. The real share is 79%. So congrats to those who got it right. And yes, that means 4 out of 5 vehicles sold in 2020 were light duty trucks. So it's time to ask the question, how we got there. To answer this question, I will hand it over Brigitte Millard of Polytechnique Montréal, who will present the evolution of the automobile fleet over time. Brigitte?
Thank you very much, Marc-André. I'll just need to share my screen first. Continue. Step 2 here. And present. So is that okay? I think so. So let's talk first a bit about the methodology that we use. The study was carried in 2 steps. First of all, we really tried to define precisely what we want to measure. And since the first thing that we quickly realized is that SUV do not form an homogeneous category of vehicle. It's when the converse is getting more complex with time. So this raised several questions. First of all, what criteria do we use to classify vehicles? What exactly is an SUV? And also, why do we still feel the need to distinguish cars from light trucks? To answer this question, we did 2 things. So first of all, we analyzed all the physical and mechanical characteristic of a vehicle sold in Canada since the 90s. And we also analyzed the definition used by the industry and the government to define or to describe those vehicles. This analysis showed 2 things. First, the category are really not uniform. And second, the definition are really messed up. So we cannot really figure out what exactly was an SUV through those definition and characteristics. And this analysis also make it as possible to establish that the first, one of the first factor of the increase of the popularity of SUV is the transformation of the characteristic. We'll get to there. But we also find that there's multiple factors that contribute to the popularity of SUV, and to make a systematic review of them, we did several things. The first thing is that we make a review of this scientific literature. This turned out to be very limited, as you can imagine, since if it was a clear question, we will not be there today. So it's really complex. The second thing that we do to try to understand the increase of popularity is to analyze the trend in demand. So we look at the sales of vehicles, and we also look in the expense of household. We compare different regions, we compare across time to see, can we see some common factor or different factor in those separate analyses. And the last thing that we do is that we look at the economic theory of consumption. So when we see a variation in the quantity demanded on the market, the economic theory tells us that there may be first of all, a relaxation of the budget constraint of the household that can be caused either by an increase in the income or better access to credit. So that's one factor that could be contributed. The other one is the decrease in the price of SUV. And the third factor is an increase in the price of car, which is direct substitute of SUV. The last one is a change in preference that could be related to a change in lifestyle or to other factors that can influence the choice of consumers, such as publicity. What our result shows is that all these factors contribute to the popularity of SUV across time. And the transformation, the vehicle fleet occur over several decades. The SUV, even if it's really a popular vehicle today, it's not a brand new vehicle, actually. It exists way back at the beginning of the century in slightly different form, but it exists a long time ago. It wasn't popular for the general population. It was mainly used by the government and by government industry to move goods. What happened next? Actually, in the 70s, it was with the oil crisis, it was a pivotal decade, since the fuel economy standards and other measures have helped to make these large vehicles that were difficult to drive, expensive, and fuel expensive, especially accessible to the general population. The first light truck after the 70s, the first light truck, the real first light truck that were marketed on the market was the minivan. But during the 80s, we already see a slight increase in the sales of the SUV. SUV became the most popular vehicle sold in the United States in 1993 and in 2004 in Canada. One other factor that really contributed to the popularity of SUV is in '96. It's the first RAV4, which is the first what we call a crossover. A crossover is basically an SUV, but it's not on body on frame. It's on a unibody conception, which means it's a lighter and more efficient vehicles. So it's more accessible to the general population. If we go a bit further in time, just before the financial crisis in 2008, there was a high increase in the oil price. And this made huge pressure on the fabricant to offer more vehicles that were efficient. And with the financial crisis, it really changed the market. I'm sorry, my first language is French, and sometimes I get lost in my thought. So that's it. So the 2008 really changed two things. First, we saw even more efficient vehicle appear on the market. And secondly, we see change in the way we fund vehicle. So we can now pay your vehicle on more, I will say it. We see increasing borrowing period, which means that before we were renting vehicle on 3 years basis, and now it's on 5, 6, 7 years or 8 years basis that we can fund a vehicle. That really changed the market. So people can buy now more expensive vehicle than in the past. And what we see is people do buy more expensive vehicle, that they are bigger, they are larger, they are the weights are also more important. And it's also vehicles that are really interesting for the industry, since they give more bigger margin profit. And in the supply, what we see is a decrease in the sedan and hatchback and pickups. The greater decline in the supply of the market was in the station wagon, which can be considered as a direct substitute of SUV. And we see a significant increase in the offer of SUV, of course. So the market today, if you go to the car shop, you really have more choice for SUV than any other kind of vehicles. We also see some change in the demand. So the first buyers of the SUV was above average income, mainly male, more families, and also people that lives more in the peripheral of cities. But since we have now more crossovers on the market, those vehicles are more accessible to a various category of buyers, including more female, above the average household in terms of income, more younger and more older buyers also. And here what we see on the screen is the change in the vehicle position. The title is not right. It's really the position of the car. So what we see is we know that before the 50s, women were not driving cars a lot, and older people also. But today we can really see the increase on the woman's side and also on the older drivers. Those drivers contribute to more cars on the road. Of course, it's not only their fault, it's just the general motorization that is increasing, but the visibility of SUV is directly correlated also with this increase of motorization. And when we are look at the demand for SUV, we see that the men still buy more than women, but like the demand for SUV is increasing in every group. Every year from the 2000 to 2019 today, it's still increasing today. And the key finding that we can have is first, the classification are not incorrect in calorimetrics, which means that when you consider the SUV category, you have really big vehicles and also really small vehicle. If you think the Hyundai Kona, which has been marketed in 2017, it's smaller than a regular car. So we have the SUV category now mix a lot of category of type of vehicles, which are really difficult to define. And on different category, if we think about sedan, hatchback, a station wagon, or SUV, you can find vehicle of the really similar metrics in different category, and that they are treated differently also by the law. The second important is that the demographic have impact. We know that once a consumer have chosen an SUV, they will keep across time to choose again and again an SUV. So if you start to consume really younger those type of vehicle, probably you will keep them through all your life. And the change in the vehicle fleet have multiple impacts on security, on Ghg emission, on the efficiency of the road network. We'll talk about those impacts a bit later this afternoon, and also on the household financial health, since they are more expensive. And more the market supply is diversified, more the demand, they attract different type of buyers, and more there are different type of buyers that are interested by those vehicles, more the market try to satisfy their needs. So we have, it's like on a roll, the characteristics of the vehicle are really changing across time and rapidly. So that's the key findings for our part.
Thank you, Brigitte. That was a great presentation, and I feel that we have a very comprehensive picture of the problem now. So it's time to go to our second question. to our second question about demand and the role of advertising in consumer choices. According to our study, what is the share of car ads that feature light-duty trucks in newspaper and magazines? I'll give you about 10 seconds to answer that question. So we're waiting for the results, and the results are in. And I would say that we are among experts here, since 64% of people were right. It's 79%. So we have, what a coincidence. The market shares and the advertising are aligned at 79%. It's not me saying it. The numbers are speaking for themselves. But that's a lot. Light-duty trucks are predominantly or exclusively featured in 79% of automobile advertising. It's a lot. So we'll now explore car advertising practices with our mobility analyst at Équiterre, Andréane Brazeau. Andréane, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Just one moment. We're fixing our webinar, our presentation issues. So, thank you, Marc-André. Before getting into the methodology of the section, I think I want to mention that we based our analysis on the fact that there is a widely recognized scientific consensus on the influence of advertising on consumer choices. The literature is clear and unequivocal about that. Otherwise, there wouldn't be as much advertising as there is and as we see in society. So despite this recognition, it's very difficult, if not possible, to put a precise number on the role of advertising. However, the analysis of advertising practices raised significant concerns with regards to the climate crisis and, well, their inconsistency with the crisis. So we also considered that our governments want to put an end to the sale of gasoline-powered vehicles in 2035 in Quebec and 2040 in Canada. Yet the investments in car advertising are still gigantic, especially online. And online advertising is also a growing sector with few regulations at the moment. So digital ad spendings by the auto industry are about equal to the rest of the retail sector, which is enormous. And that's about 1/5 of the entire digital ad spendings that's coming from the automotive industry alone. So the numbers for all advertising, including traditional media, are approximate. The auto industry is a leader in all the sectors. And so the specific data is available in the report, although it was, well, not surprising, but it was quite interesting to see that advertising investments are very, very difficult to find. And we actually found numbers here and there, and we're able to have an overview with that. But in general, it's quite imprecise. So in terms of methodology, our study was conducted in 2 stages. So first we conducted a content analysis of the ads. So we went through more than 1,000 issues of Canadian newspapers and magazines. We established our benchmarks and selected 132 ads for content analysis. And we created this corpus and analysis grid based on the literature as well as on our exploratory interviews. And so our methodology allowed us to count or to get a ratio of ads where there is mostly or exclusively light duty trucks that are shown. And that is the 79% number that we put in the poll in the beginning. So here we can ask the question, like, is it the advertising of light duty trucks that make them popular, or is it only the auto industry that is answering to the demand? You can share your thoughts about that in the chat. So the next part of our research was the analysis of the regulatory framework around around advertising, sorry. And so our approach allowed us to calculate the ratio. So we also, this analysis of the regulatory framework, also included a comparison of the framework that is applied in other jurisdictions around the world at the moment. So the conclusions from the content analysis include the following points. So the vast majority of ads use nature or its properties to sell light-duty trucks. And more specifically, the domination of the environment is often shown with off-road vehicles in natural settings, such as the one you see on screen. SUVs in particular are shown in a variety of settings, so in the suburbs as well as in city, which may suggest to the public that they are versatile through exposure to a high number of ads that show different environments compared to other types of vehicle. For example, crossovers were almost entirely featured in natural settings, as if there was a desire to create this relationship between these vehicles and nature, since sometimes they're smaller, although that's not a very definitive rule. And the next thing we observed is the frequency at which holidays were used, as of course in the newspapers. So the discounts and the product scarcity are themes that are very often promoted alongside holidays, commercial holidays, I must say, such as the Boxing Day and Black Friday. And in terms of safety, which is a topic that is very often raised when we talk about SUVs, it's mostly crossover and SUV ads that promote the safety aspects. And when they do, it's often by using more than one reference to safety in the same ad. Another thing that we found was that the technological aspect of the vehicle is very recurring. Now, another interesting topic is regarding the financing arrangements. So they are very frequently showcased in different ways, whether it's with free tires included, or regular payments on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly basis, down payments, deferred payments, what have you. Interestingly though, less than half of all of the ads we analyzed displayed the full retail price. So there is a little bit of an irony here. And it's worth adding that none of the ads mentioned the vehicle's fuel consumption or the CO2 emissions, which may reduce the capacity of consumers to make an informed vehicle choice. And in addition, there are a few ads that highlight the vehicle's fuel efficiency, but they do not display the fuel consumption. So that's also kind of ironic. And lastly, it's worth mentioning that minivans are barely visible in the ads, confirming that, well, although they're considered light duty trucks, SUVs really have replaced them on the market, and they're not really what the auto industry is trying to sell. Next, on the regulatory side, so the second portion of our study, we were able to make a number of observations. So there is no control of ads before they are published. So the laws, the standards, the regulations in place right now act in a reactive way after complaints have been received, for example, rather than exercising control before the ads are disseminated to the general public, as is the case for children's advertising, for example. Because we know how powerful advertisement can be. So also one more thing, some sectors have specific codes to respect, like the cosmetic sector, but not the auto industry. And finally, it was noticed that advertising standards and laws can evolve in response to public health issues. So this was seen with tobacco advertising, car speeding, that was promoted in advertisement, and yeah, well, these are the two examples that I have. So we have tobacco and speed driving, and therefore we observed that the environmental component has not yet been integrated into the laws and the regulations. Although it is feasible, it's something that was done before when we really saw that there was a public health issue. And so this leads to our main conclusion, which is that there is an obvious mismatch between the framework for car advertising and the climate crisis, as well as with the government's electrification targets, were being unproductive in that regard by still showcasing that many light-duty vehicles abundantly. However, there are several examples of countries that updated regulations around advertising, and so they were able to reflect the climate emergency. And well, Canada could definitely learn from these countries. I'm just going to give a few examples. So the United Kingdom has a very simple rule, which is to mandate the auto industry to display the vehicle's fuel consumption and CO2 emissions. And we also have New Zealand, for example, who mandates the auto industry to not depict environmental damage in areas of high conservation value, including wetlands. So I'm just highlighting things that we did see here in our ads. We did see trucks that were like not on the official public infrastructures, which is actually an illegal behavior to have. So we have these ironies that really did become the norm when we did our analysis. And lastly, so with regards to all of this, we came up with 4 recommendations for the specific sector of advertising. So first, we think that it's really important to recognize the rise of light-duty trucks as a public health and safety issue. And regarding that aspect, Polytechnique will be here later to talk about these impacts and to really help you understand how they really do damage our society. Our second recommendation is to form an independent advisory committee. Then we have building on existing advertising restrictions. So as I mentioned, we're talking about children's advertising, cosmetics, speeding, tobacco, everything that harm us, basically, and that we did regulate. And so finally, we think that it's important to gradually tighten the regulatory framework for auto advertising and increase investments in the promotion of sustainable mobility, because we really are in a David against Goliath kind of dynamic here. So like for example, there were almost no electric vehicles, very, very few hybrid vehicles, and well, 0 ads about active transportation, for example. So there are various ways in which we can strengthen the regulations, and we detailed them in our report. So I'm inviting you to take a look at it and to email us if you have any questions. So that's pretty much it for me. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Adrienne. Clearly, there is still a lot of work to do with regards to advertising practices. I mean, goat, really? If I want to buy some goat cheese, I'll go to a cheese shop, not to my car dealership, but that's another question. Just a quick reminder that we're going to have a Q&A session afterwards, and I see some activity in the Q&A chat box. Keep the questions coming, keep the conversation going as well in the chat box as well. Make sure to keep your question for the Q&A chat box that is dedicated to your questions. Now it's time to move on to the next part of our webinar and ask serious questions like who owns small trucks and why? So I'm happy to introduce Verena Gruber, a marketing professor at HEC Montréal. She'll present the profile of light-duty trucks owner and their purchase motivations. She will also present the findings from one-on-one interviews and focus group. On the current slide, you can see Cyrano and HEC Montréal's team members who contributed to this part of the study. Please note that there will be a 5-minute break after this presentation. I will be back after Verena's presentation to remind you that we have this 5-minute break. And we're on time. So I can pretty much guarantee this 5-minute break unless Verena goes over. So Verena, the pressure is on your shoulder and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marc-André. As you've just heard, I didn't do this research by myself. I have a brilliant team. I'm just a designated speaker here. Some of my members are in the backup for all the difficult questions that you might have that might arise during the presentation. So we are going to delve into the consumer perspective. Once again, we'll start with the methodological approach. As Marc-André has mentioned, there were two phases. We started with a survey. The idea here was really to understand how does the situation in Canada look like. So we have a representative sample, 1,377 vehicle owners. So that was one of the criteria that we had at the beginning. We were only looking for people who had a vehicle and who were using that vehicle regularly. The survey was in the field from October 27th to the end of November. It was administered by Qualtrics. And we had an average survey duration of 25.8 minutes, so relatively long, because we also had a lot of questions to ask. As I've mentioned, these are just the major findings that I'm going to present in this short time. There's a huge 300-page report coming up with all the details. What are the key findings? Now, first, vehicles are indispensable to Canadians. So on a scale of 7 points, we have a global average of 5.73. So a very high mean value here. So Canadians in general, in our sample, they all consider the vehicle really indispensable. They believe that their life wouldn't be the same without a vehicle. When we look into what is the primary vehicle of the household, we see that the majority, so 51%, do own light-duty trucks. And among them, the SUVs are indeed the most prominent ones with 38%. We have a couple of pickups and also 6% of minivans. And what is interesting when we look into how these purchases have been financed, we actually see a reverse trend in terms of dealer financing versus personal savings. So you'll see in the third part of that slide that SUV owners, so the blue charts, are much more likely to use a dealer financing than personal savings, whereas the sedan owners are more likely to use their personal savings against instead of the dealer financing. So this already points towards, and you've heard it before and you'll hear it again, that the type of financing is going to influence the type of vehicle that consumers choose. We've also used a 1 to 100 effective scale where we're just asking how much do you like different types of vehicles. And here again, irrespective of what type of vehicle is currently being owned, SUVs come out as one of these very likable vehicles, so to say. One of our most important dependent variables in that survey was the purchasing likelihood for different types of vehicles. So at the very end, we've asked all of our respondents, how likely is it that you are going to buy an SUV as your next vehicle? From 1, not at all likely, to 7, very likely. And here again, that we see that overall, so across the whole sample, SUVs emerge as number 1. So the purchasing likelihood is highest for SUVs, followed by sedans. And we've also wanted to share the purchasing likelihood for electric vehicles, which is much lower at 3.78. And this is something that we will follow up in a qualitative part where we look into what are the different perceptions with these types of vehicles. Now for the survey, there were 4 key themes that emerged that were influencing SUV preference. First, there were personal and contextual factors. There were aspects related to the external environment, such as the influence of social norms or the influence of media. There were certain product-related aspects, and I've seen the question by Stephanie already regarding the safety. So safety was obviously something that was mentioned together with other aspects directly related to the type of vehicle. And then there are individual psychological factors that are also driving SUV preference. In terms of the personal and contextual aspects, so mostly related to socio-demographic factors, we tried to carve out a little bit the profile of an SUV owner, pickup owner, and so on. So in terms of the people that use their vehicles to transport materials, the most commonly used vehicle is a pickup truck. For households that have a proportionately higher income, we see that the SUV is the vehicle that they are going to buy most likely in the next purchase. There's also a correlation with the number of household members. So the more people are living in a household, the more likely the person is going to buy a SUV. Now, again, for people living in rural areas, we see that the pickup truck emerges as the most likely choice for the next vehicle. Something that has been that has a high explanatory power in terms of why people buy an SUV is whether they already own an SUV or not. So those, and this is something that we'll see in the qualitative part in the interviews, is that those people that own an SUV tend to be very, very satisfied with it. And they are much more likely to buy an SUV again. In terms of the person, and I say that is more likely to buy an SUV, we see that the average is a little higher for women than for men. And on the right side, you also see the provinces where SUVs are most popular. So there is a tendency towards more, I want to say, rural areas. So it's not necessarily Vancouver or Montreal. All right, second, we have the aspects that are related to the external environment. As I said, there is the influence of those people around us. We'll see in the interviews as well, is very important. The dealer is still the source of information that is most important when purchasing. So an average of 4.43, followed by friends and family and websites. When we look into specifically what type of media is related with SUV purchase intention, we see that it's TV and radio ads, so very relevant to the results of Amran, and social media that are used as sources of information. Now, the question related to this part of the presentation: what do you think the Canadian public responded to the following question? What is the most important factor when buying a vehicle? So 50 seconds are over. And we see that safety is indeed the aspect that has been mentioned most often. And interestingly, not only like safety is a broad concept, right? And we are going to examine that in more detail in the qualitative phase. But what we see is in the survey is that it's both safety in case of impact and also safety in case of bad weather or wintry conditions. People feel so much more safer in an SUV. They're safer in terms of impact, they're safer in terms of when the conditions aren't ideal. The SUV creates this halo of safety. When we look into the analysis of which specific factors influence the purchasing likelihood, we see that comfort, appearance, the four-wheel drive and external features, as well as the elevated driving position, have a positive influence. That means that the more important the four-wheel drive is to you, the more likely you are to buy an SUV. Brand and carbon emissions have a negative correlation, meaning that the more important carbon emissions are to you, the less likely you are to purchase an SUV as your next vehicle. The fourth part is related to the individual psychological factors. And here we have looked at a couple of psychological constructs, values, attitudes, and have looked at how they're influencing the likelihood to purchase an SUV. As I've already mentioned, on the right side, you see our regression analysis. The type of primary vehicle, as I've mentioned, is a very important predictor. If you have an SUV, you're also much more likely to buy another SUV. The interesting part is the descriptive social norms. And this is something I'm going to talk a little bit more about in the qualitative phase. So what is considered to be the norm around me, what other friends, family, people around me drive is influencing my purchasing intention. Media influence, we already had that. And then there are a couple of aspects that relate to affective motives. And this is also what you see on the left side. So people who score very high on affective motives, that means that people who really enjoy driving, who have get a lot of pleasure out of driving, are much more likely to buy an SUV. The indispensability, something that we've seen at the very beginning as well, an epistemic value. This is a construct that captures a little bit the technological affinity of people. This is also positively related, though to a lesser extent, to the intention to purchase an SUV. We also have one significant negative influence, and that is environmental identity, meaning that those people that have a stronger or score higher on the construct measuring environmental identity are much less likely to buy an SUV. Okay. We're going to continue right away with the interviews. So this was something that was, the survey was very insightful for us because it really allowed us to understand and have a good overview of the Canadian market, to understand what are important aspects such as safety. But we then wanted to go into more detail and really carve out this perspective of consumers. So this is why we've chosen a qualitative approach. And on the one hand, we've conducted interviews, and then we followed up with focus groups. So for the interviews, what we've done is in the survey, our respondents were able to indicate whether they would be interested to continue with the qualitative part or not. 569 of our respondents have said, yes, we would like to continue. With a cluster approach, we made sure that we have a diversified sample in terms of socio-demographic criteria, but also in terms of what kind of vehicle they have, how likely they are to purchase another SUV, and so on. We've then contacted these individuals and conducted in-depth interviews, individual in-depth interviews that lasted between 42 and 87 minutes and resulted in 112 pages of verbatim transcripts. So a lot of data for us to analyze. The idea here was really to see what do these concepts that have emerged in the survey really mean to our participants. The focus group, here again, we've basically looked into whom of our interviewees seem to be interested enough and talkative enough to continue with the focus group discussions, where we were showing different kind of advertisements, and we're talking more generally about the media and marketing influence. Okay, so in terms of the interviews, what we have done is we were trying to break the ice. Obviously, the context made it a little bit more difficult. Sometimes we were not able to see the other person. It was important that we were making our interviewees feel comfortable. We then talked about a couple of things that we found in the individuals' survey responses. For example, Marc-André, I found that you are consider your vehicle very indispensable. Can you explain a little bit more in what context you would typically use your vehicle? And that was important because it showed us that sometimes people have an actual need. We were talking with Brigitte, who has a walker and who literally can't go any longer distance. She needs the vehicle, and she needs an SUV because she needs to put her walker in the trunk. So she has a lot of reasons and arguments for why she has the SUV. Based on the survey, we just saw that the vehicle is indispensable for her, and we saw that she's not driving a lot. So we were a little surprised and asked her that. So the idea of the second section was to really deepen our understanding of our participants and of their specific perspective on the vehicle they own and on aspects related to that vehicle. In the third part, we have used so-called projective technique. So this was, the idea here was to tap into aspects that are potentially a bit more sensitive or delicate. Say questions related to the kind of social status and prestige that is conveyed by a vehicle. It's not something that people are generally very comfortable to talk about if asked directly. So it is easier for them to talk about a third person. So we were sharing insights from our survey, and said a typical respondent from our survey would say that a certain type of vehicle conveys prestige. What is your perspective on that? The focus groups also followed several steps. The first thing is that we were asking them in general, what do you remember of advertisements? Like, what comes to your mind when you think of them? And we were trying to make a link to the results of what Andréane has just presented. We then also had a phase where we were showing certain advertisements to our participants for say 15 or 30 seconds, and we're asking them to share with us what they remember from these slides, from these advertisements. The idea here was to see what do they focus on, what jumps into their eye, what is it that is really salient for them. And in the end, we also had manipulated some of existing SUV advertisements and looked into how do participants react to these. The interviews were analyzed inductively. That means that we've looked through all these hundreds of pages of transcript, and we have identified certain themes that emerged from the interviews. Some of them are related, and we've heard aspects of that as well. Driving in the Canadian climate, in general, the omnipresence of vehicles and aspects related to the driving pleasure. We have a section also on electric vehicles that is quite interesting, normative influences and vehicles as aspirational products that the individuals really aspire to. What I'm going to focus on right now in this presentation is, on the one hand, trying to understand the SUV, the phenomenon SUV, and on the other hand, looking into the decision-making process and the different influences at various stages of the decision-making process. So in terms of the phenomenon of SUV, we are really, because we try to have a somewhat varied sample in our interviewees. We obviously have people with SUVs. We also had a couple of interviewees without them. What is clear is that there are opposing views. There are those that really consider SUVs to be the perfect vehicle. It meets all their needs. It couldn't be more perfect. If we ask them if there is anything negative that comes to their mind, they say, I really cannot think of anything. They are just the perfect vehicles. There are also those people that associate with SUVs high fuel consumption. They believe it is unnecessarily large. They associate with it much higher costs, both in terms of the price upfront, but also in terms of maintenance. They also, and this is an interesting aspect, believe that SUVs provide a false sense of security. Now, in terms of, again, what do people associate with it, the practical side, obviously there are people, like, as I mentioned, Brigitte, who needs to put her walker into the trunk, and she said that she really couldn't fit it on the back seat. She now has a crossover that works perfectly fine for her. But in general, and this is the quote that we see on the bottom, an SUV is an image of excess. So she says there is a certain legitimacy for people like her, for families that have several children, for people that have to transport materials. They might need a certain type of vehicle, but in general, it's, for most parts, it's not necessary. Another aspect was related to safety. And this is interesting because safety emerged in the survey as one of the most important influencing factor. But now we were able to carve out a little bit more, what does safety mean? So we've asked our interviewees, what does it mean to you that the vehicle is safe? And they often associate it with a feeling of being present on the road. And this is something that obviously is very much aligned with what we've seen about increasing size and weight. So the heavier it is, the larger it is, the more they feel that it's on the road. They feel that they're better protected in case of an accident. And we literally have people that were saying, well, I don't care about the other person as long as I walk away from it. And then one more factor that also played into the notion of safety was the protection against the harsh Canadian climate. And this was also a matter of control, because individuals, our interviewees, they said, well, if with an SUV, I am not getting stuck anywhere. I know that I can always get out. I know that I'm safe. It's very dependable. I'm going to be fine with it. Last aspect that was related to understanding the phenomenon of SUVs is that people think that it's because of its height, because it's more spacious, it's also more comfortable. So there is this association with comfort. As I mentioned before, two aspects are interesting here. It's the phenomenon of control and how important control is in their understanding of safety, in their understanding of why SUVs are so popular. And what the second point is the phenomenon of normality and what we consider normal size. Now, in terms of the decision-making process, what was quite interesting to see is when we start with the evaluation of alternatives, we see that people are generally willing to make quite some sacrifices for their vehicle of choice. There have been some that we have interviewed a Hummer driver who said, well, it's not very comfortable, but I mean, this is, you know, if you want to have a lot, you have to give a lot. And he wanted to have a vehicle that drives like a tank. We have other interviewees who said that, well, I want to feel safe and it has to be a sturdy car. And this is why I don't really care about the fuel efficiency. It's not a top criterion. So they are aware that vehicles come with trade-offs, but they're always able to justify for themselves why they would go for the SUV. The second point, and this is interesting, looking back into the results of the survey, is that yes, individuals do consult with dealers, but they do not necessarily trust them. So there's always a grain of skepticism whether they are just trying to sell them something. So individuals around them that they trust, friends and family, remain very important sources of information. The third aspect, and that is quite interesting, is that we're trying to look into more detail, what is the role of financing? And that is obviously has a major influence. We have already seen in the survey that depending on the financing type, people are more likely to go for more expensive vehicles, for SUVs. And this is something that our interviewees confirmed. They said, if I wouldn't get a lease for 6 years, I wouldn't have been able to buy this vehicle. I would have had to go for a smaller one. So there is this link between type of financing and the kind of vehicles that individuals purchase. What is also interesting and directly related is the influence of taxes and subsidies. However, there is quite a counterintuitive effect in that taxes might lead people to not switch car, but just get a second one. We have seen this in the case of Simon, who said that, well, we've asked him why he got a hybrid vehicle in addition to his SUV. Simon lives in British Columbia. He said, well, the government was giving me $12,000 bucks. I mean, I'm not going to throw this away. So I'm just going to go somewhere and buy that vehicle. So that is the kind of counterintuitive effect that I think is important to remember here. Other interviewees, Dylan, for example, we've asked him about luxury taxes, what that would do for his preference for SUVs. He said, nothing, I'll just get the second one. And then I would mostly drive, or if the fuel prices would be taxed more heavily. It said, well, I would mostly drive with the other vehicle, then I'd get the second one and only take out the SUV for pleasurable rides. Now, in terms of the advertisements, SUV ads, if you think of one, what would you say is the first theme that comes to mind? All right, let's see what the answers are. Yes, adventure and exploration. I think we're a little biased by having seen the mountain goat, right? Generally speaking, all of them are true. All of them are being shown in advertising. Is something that I like to say in class, that there are only correct answers. Here's a classic example. It's something from the Calgary Herald. We see the vehicles, there is a lot of information, and the question is, what type of information is that? Is it conducive to selecting the vehicle that is really most appropriate for my needs? According to our focus group participants, not. So they are all aware that the prices that are displayed on vehicle ads are very often segmented into very small installments. Very often we really don't know what the total price is. And if we know the total price, then very often it's a base model that doesn't include any options. So there is a lot of skepticism regarding the price. There is also the awareness that seeing small installments makes you believe that you're actually able to afford that kind of vehicle. The small installments are also related to this increasing tendency of spreading payments over larger and larger periods. It's something that our interviewees have also said. I remember Brigitte saying, I have the lease over 6 years and I already thought that that was way too long. So there is an awareness that that doesn't seem right, the long periods that we are having for the vehicle payments. Our interviewees, our focus group participants have also lamented the lack of transparency of the small print. So very often at the bottom left, we see these kind of things. We're not really sure about what that is. There's also a lot of confusion about interest rates, the validity of these interest rates, to what do they apply, and so on. Now, in terms of the perspective of what consumers want to see in the ads, as I've mentioned in this last part, we have tried to manipulate advertisements to show different types of information about the operating costs, about different financing arrangements, about energy efficiency, so something that would be compulsory in other countries. What we find is that people don't really care about these things, especially related to energy efficiency. They don't think it's very important. If it is, then let's just buy them an electric vehicle. Very often that kind of information is being dismissed because people think that this is general information that doesn't necessarily apply to me because I drive very differently. I don't drive aggressively, so that would not apply to me. Or they just generally have no trust in these numbers, and scandals like the one of Volkswagen didn't really help in that matter. So they say, well, dealers, they're just gonna write, manufacturers, they're gonna write whatever is defendable in terms of the energy efficiency, and then you'll never really get that. So it's not an information that I'm looking at. So there are a lot of rationalizations, justifications as to why this information is not relevant. So what's coming next? We're still not done. What we see from both the survey and from the qualitative part is that there are certain themes that might be interesting levers in order to make SUVs and large vehicles a little less attractive. So just like the often cited truth campaign against smoking, what can we do in order to make these vehicles less likable? The first idea is to focus on driving skills. We have seen how our respondents, our interviewees have a very pronounced identity as drivers. They consider themselves as good drivers. They believe that they can manage all different kind of difficult driving conditions. So if we look at a message that would question a little bit their ability by providing them information that SUVs are actually much more involved in accidents. I'd like to quote here one of our interviewees, Renault, who said, if you can't drive in a Canadian winter with a front traction, then you shouldn't be driving at all. He's saying that these vehicles make drivers overconfident, they're actually much worse drivers. Would that kind of message help to make this type of vehicle less attractive? The second point is related to the social norms. We are heavily influenced by what other people do around us, what is considered the norm. There is a possibility to situationally activate certain norms. So if we activate smaller and electric vehicles as the norm, would that make large vehicles like SUVs less attractive? And the last point, and this is an interesting finding from the interviews, most of our interviewees drive the same kind of vehicle that they have been growing up with. That means that we are predisposing our children to considering a certain type of vehicle as normal, and we predispose them to have that kind of vehicle. So how about a message that would focus on the kind of legacy that we leave for future generations, not only in terms of destroying their environment right now, but also forcing them into repeating the same mistakes again. So these are there's three types of messages that we are experimenting with right now, and which results you will see in the final report. All right.
It's back to me. Yeah, so we are going to take that 5-minute break. But before that, thank you so much, Verena. What a comprehensive analysis you just showed. There's so much to unpack here. We have about 5 minutes to do that in the break. But no, we'll be able to discuss more in detail what you just said at the end of the session. One would think that buying a larger vehicle would be for an extra cargo capacity, but no, it's for safety. This is mind-blowing. Really interesting stuff there. Your team and you did an outstanding job. It's now time to go for the quick break. Water, bathroom, stretch your legs, get more coffee. Go outside for 5 minutes. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Thanks. we're back. So yeah, we're back. Thanks for staying with us. Quick reminder to write your questions in the Q&A chat box and not in the chat that is just for chat. There's a specific box for Q&A. Keep the question going, keep the conversation going as well. We have a new quiz question for you that will show up on your screen. What we want to know is by what percentage could GHG emissions be reduced if Canadian fleet was made up of the 10 most fuel efficient models sold on the market? 20, 40, 60, or 80%. I'll give you a few seconds to submit your answer. And we have the results. So 33% of people said 40%. Well, almost. The right answer is 60%. That's quite significant considering the fact that emissions from the transportation sector are still increasing. So to discuss the implication of the question we just asked, I will now hand it over to Professor Catherine Morancy, who is also the holder of the mobility chair at Polytechnique, and her colleague Brigitte Millard. Together, they will present their approach in evaluating the various impact of the increase in the light-duty trucks, as well as some partial results. So the floor is yours, Catherine.
Thank you very much. So Brigitte will share the screen. And now it's going, and I'll start my timer. Okay, let's move. I don't think you're in presentation mode, Brigitte. Thank you. So let's move to the next slide. So actually what we, just few numbers regarding the trends we've observed in the last 19 years, I have to say. So these are things that we already presented, but it's to show you the evolution of the average length and the average car footprint. But I think the two most important points are the yellow and the blue ones, because what you see is the composition of the fleet every year. So the features of the fleet, which composes the Quebec car fleet. And actually what we've estimated at the end is the attributes of the cars which are 2 years old or less. And that's where you see what will happen in the next years. So actually in 2019, you have various age for the car fleet. So various cars coming from various previous years. But when you look at those who have been sold in the 2 last years, you see that there seems to be much more higher impacts that will be upcoming in the next years with the evolution of this fleet. So we see that, for instance, the average length of a car is 464 centimeters in comparison with something which is more around 462. So we should see more impacts in the upcoming years. So next slide. So what we try to estimate here is a diversity of impacts of the change in the car fleet. So the first thing is what I call the road obesity. It's the fact that cars are taking more space, both in terms of, because they are getting larger in all their dimensions, and they are also more numerous on the network. Then we'll talk about the impact on GHG, road safety, and the household financial health. So next slide. So just to enter this topic, one thing that we're looking at is the space taken for or attributed to cars. So you just see for the Montreal Island, the proportion of the area, so the area covered by the road network, which is allocated to cars in movement and cars which are parked. So you see that in some neighborhoods, it's quite important. And this is what we do of our space. So it's quite important to see how much of this is allocated this mode and how much is not allocated to the other modes. So let's move to the next slide. So for the topics we're trying to assess, we need some assumption on the consumption and the scale of the fleet. So here, just to exemplify the way we assess the problem is that when you take a curbside, of course, you cannot park as many large cars as small cars. So when you look at the evolution of the attributes of the car fleet, you see that we may get some issues in the capacity of our network, because if cars are getting larger, then you will park less car than what we used to. So with the same network, we are losing some capacity to either store or have these cars travel on our network. Let's move to the other slide. So the first thing we are doing is estimating the impact of the change in car fleet to the parking capacity. So we can do a simple estimation just by taking the full length of the network and dividing it by the space occupied by one vehicle. But what we do is here is account for the regulation related to parking. So we look at the sign, we look at the time of the day of the week, because this is changing over time. We look at the curvature at the end of every road segment. We take into account the presence of fire hydrant, private entrance. So we really try to estimate the real curbside capacity, on-street capacity for car. And then we take different assumption on the length which is occupied by every car. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see for one of the neighborhoods in Montreal, which is called Outremont, so the little zone that was shown, which is the impact of changing the intervehicular distance occupied between, so what we allocate to one car. And what we see, depending on the time of the day or the type of day in the week, because the ability to park will change. So you see that you're losing capacity. So your ability to store cars while they are not moving is decreasing with the increase in the size of cars. And it can have very microscopic impact. On one curbside, you can actually lose one full spot or two, depending on how it is organized and the presence of these spots where you cannot park. So you see a decrease in 9% if you move from 5 to 5.5 meter, which is allocated to every car. And you also see that, of course, you have an important reduction in parking capacity for on-street. So next slide. The next thing we try to estimate is actually the footprint. So you have a car, 95% of the time, usually it will be parked. It's much higher in the pandemic period because we have a car surplus, which are being parked most of the day. So the average space occupied by a vehicle has increased from 8 to 8.31 square meters. And at the same time, we saw an increase, and this is for the Greater Montreal area, but similar estimations can be done for other areas if the data are available. So actually, we try to assess how much space is occupied by these vehicles. So we have a space allocated to this vehicle, but these cars already exist. They are more numerous than before, and each in average occupies more space. So we have an increase in 45% of the space occupied by these vehicles in our regions. Next slide. So this is the assessment of the impact on congestion. So this is a more complex estimation we are doing. So the first method we're using is the microscopic approach. So and it's not an easy concept to explain. So I will try to do this simply. So you have every road segment has a capacity, and the capacity is expressed in terms of standard cars, which are called the personal car equivalent. So this is the maximum number of cars that can travel on a segment during 1 hour. So to combine all the attributes of all the cars and vehicles who are using the network, we use this PCA, so this personal car equivalent, to convert every vehicle into this standard car. So for instance, a bus has a conversion factor of 2. So this means if you have one bus, it takes the equivalent of 2 personal car equivalent capacity. So these factors, these congestion factors, depends on the length of the vehicle, the braking distance, the visibility, the weight. So a lot of factors will impact the capacity taken by one specific vehicle. So if we go to the next slide, what we do is we do 2 estimations just to illustrate how it can impact the capacity of our network. So if we take one road segment of 5 kilometers, where the legal speed is 100 kilometers per hour, and you take 2 lanes, so an average of 400, not an average, but a 4,000 per hour capacity in terms of standard vehicles, and we estimate the impact of the composition of the fleet on the travel time. to go through this 5 kilometer segment. So if you are alone traveling, it will take you 3 minutes to travel this segment. But if everyone is driving a Ford F-150, it will take you 7.3 minutes. So this is due to the fact that the capacity will be reached much more faster because these cars take more space. They have a longer braking distance. So in this case, it's just the conversion factor based on length. But there are other things that we can find in the literature. So you see here, if we have 6,000 vehicles wanting to use this segment, then the composition of the fleet will change the time it takes to use this segment. If we go to the next slide, we have found some conversion factors in the literature. And one paper was quite interesting because it provided conversion factors for SUVs specifically. So they proposed 3 types of cars: the small cars, the regular one, which have the 1.0 conversion factor because it's a reference value, and then the SUV, in which they observed that depending on the conditions, whether it was raining or sunny, then it would take more of the capacity available. So if you take, for the same type of model, you take a fleet which is composed of 100% of SUV in rainy condition, then to travel the same segment will take 9.6 minutes for everyone who's using the road. So this is actually quite an important element to measure more precisely for the Quebec condition, because it's actually showing that depending on the composition of the fleet, for the same level of demand, travel time can increase because of the type of cars that are driven. And if we were looking into the car occupancy, so how many people benefit from this capacity, what we see over time is that the average car capacity is decreasing. And the lowest we observe in Montreal is during the AM peak period. And of course, you understand this, that if there is no congestion, there's not much issue. But when the network is highly solicited, so where there's a lot of people who want to travel, then the impact will be very important. So if we go to the next slide, it's a sort of a summary of all of this. So what we observe is that the fleet transformation, so both in terms of length, weight, type of cars, will translate into the fact that we will reach the capacity threshold faster, so with fewer vehicles. And that's a worry we should have. And if we look at the higher lengths of the newly sold cars, I think we need to take this into account. Hence, so we face capacity faster, so with fewer cars. And we also face what we call congestion conditions, which are defined by the government as when we reach 0.7 times the speed that you will drive at if there is no congestion. So what we call the free flow speed. So you see in the table below how many vehicles are reach the congestion level. So when you try to understand how many people can travel without being in congestion situation, of course, it would be lower due to this change in fleet. So next slide, please. I was looking at my timer. So I think it's a missed opportunity here. If we were to manage correctly the fleet, if we were to have a more precise estimation of the systematic impact of this change in car composition, I think we could prevent some larger issues to appear in the next years. So of course, what was seen in the beginning is that the new vehicles sold recently seem to have much larger features in length, weight, and height. And then you see the comparison. So the average fleet we had in 2000, the average length of the fleet we had in 2019, but also what could be our gains if we were to control for the size, namely in terms of short or long vehicles. So next slide, please. So the other thing we've estimated is the GHG emissions. Of course, we can have large-scale GHG estimations. What we try to do here is to have more precise spatial estimation of the GHG, and this is based on travel survey data. So they focus on a typical weekday of travel. This is the 2018 Montreal survey. So at the left, you see the map showing the gradient of the VKT, so vehicle kilometer travel for car driver trips. So of course, you see that as you go further from the CBD, the load, the intensity of VKT will increase. This is not surprising. At the right, you have the average fuel consumption of the car, which are owned by the resident. And you also see this spatial gradient. So of course, you'll see higher average fuel consumption level for those who stay further from the CBD. So you combine both, and we go to the next slide. And then you have the findings. So if you take this OD survey and you look into car driving trips, you'll end up with 74.7 million kilometers traveled daily by car drivers, only by the residents. Of course, it excludes long distance travel and weekend trips. And then you combine this with the type of car they own at the area level. And then you estimate the number of liters of fuel consumed daily only for this typical weekday travel. And then if you use an assumption of 250 working days per year, then you end up with estimated tons of GHG per year. So we make quick scenarios. What if people in these areas were buying the most fuel efficient vehicles which are sold and bought by residents of their own areas? What would be the gain? So we could reduce by 37% the GHG emissions. And if we were just to assume everyone would buy one of the 10 best selling fuel efficient vehicle, then we would reduce by 60%. And this is a huge reduction. And we're not talking about electric vehicle in this. We're just talking about reducing the size and the level of consumption of their typical fleet. So next slide, I think it's your turn, Brigitte.
I will go on. So regarding road safety, we have increasing statistical evidence that indicates that SUV are relatively more dangerous than other type of vehicle, especially for other road user, but also for SUVs owners in some case. So with regard, most of the literature covers the vulnerable people, which means pedestrian, cyclists and motorcyclists, which don't really have protection when they face a collision. And there are two main characteristics of the vehicle that can be dangerous to them. First of all is the height of the front of the vehicle, which also higher the level of the impact, which means the probability of having higher severity of blessure, j'ai comme un blanc, Catherine et moi.
Injuries.
Injuries, thank you. So higher severity of injuries and also probability of death. And the other aspect, which is really important, is the blind spot that can be up to twice as big as car. Most of those vehicles are now equipped with a camera and also a detector, which decrease the level of risk. But it is it's two aspects. For the owners of SUV, the two main aspects which are dangerous to them is first the elevated seated position, which increase their that encourage them to drive faster and take more risk, and also the height, the total height of the car, which can cause a rollover. But the rollover probability is related to the mass of the vehicle or the weights. So more the weights is higher, less the probability of rollover is there. Yes, and also another aspect which is really important is as the vehicle fleet characteristics evolve with time, the risk also evolve. Our research goal in the coming months is to evaluate what kind of characteristic do impose risk on which type of user of the road. Finally, the household financial debt. I will try to go faster, Marc-André. What we see in the data is that the average purchase price of vehicle is increasing, which means that the household spending also increased for transportation, but the share of the spending in the household budget is decreasing or maybe staying stable. It really depends how you look at it. What caused that is essentially that we are lengthening the period of repayment. And in this case, most of the lecturers said that the difference between a car and an SUV is about $10,000 when the purchase price difference. But today the difference is really shrinking slowly. So in 2001 vehicle, it's now about $8,000 difference. And if you take a repayment payment of 5 years, the difference per month is $103. And if you lengthen it a bit again to go to 9 years, like 108 months, the difference is it's like $75. It's like a coffee per day. So it's really hard to tell to the consumer, no, don't buy those cars. And the reason why we can lengthen the period is really because the interest rate is really low today. But that's something probably that we should think about, how we can really maybe decrease the lengthening of repayment. So it will encourage people to go to choose a cheaper vehicle, which means smaller and more efficient. And maybe I will just let Catherine do the last findings if you want.
I can rapidly wrap it up, but I think one of the things we need to focus on is to having targets where we actually reduce the number of vehicles, because it's rarely what we see in the plans. We see targets of mode shift, but rarely targets of reducing the number of cars and vehicles. I think we need to worry about the transformation of the fleets, because it can have systematic impact on the efficiency of our network, and we are losing capacity, both in terms of parking and in-vehicle moving vehicles. And we also need to make sure that the way the cars are identified or vehicles are identified will facilitate the implementation of strategies, because with all types of car, SUV, SUM, or whatever you call them, it makes fuzzy the definition or the allocation of them to a type, and then it's make it really harder to implement strategies and policies focusing on various types of car. So I would wrap it like this. Thank you.
Well, fascinating stuff yet again. Thank you so much, Catherine and Brigitte. I thought bicycles were to blame for traffic jams and loss of parking spot, but no, actually car size are. The implication for urban planning is fascinating and really important. And well, decision makers from the municipal level to the provincial and the federal level will have some decision to make regarding with this problem. And I don't know, but there are election at the municipal, the provincial, and likely the federal level within the coming year and a half. So let's see what they come up with. This study will be helpful to guide them throughout their decision-making process. So now, last but not least, let's talk about policy, public policy issue and solution. I just mentioned some of them. More specifically, what can our government do to slow down and curb the rise of light trucks? What are the current gaps and shortcomings? Before we get to the heart of the matter, we want to hear from you. So here's our final poll question. There's a referendum tomorrow morning. Which of these measures aimed at reducing GHG emission would you vote for? Is it a higher carbon tax, a bonus malus or fee-based on personal vehicle, a reform of the regulatory framework for advertising information campaigns on the impact of large vehicle? And the results are in, and people are really strongly advocating for a higher carbon tax, with 58% of the respondents chosen that option. Fee-based is the choice of 25% of our respondents, and 2 people have decided that a reform of the regulatory framework for advertising is the best way to go. This is really interesting. I think it's probably a combination of all these options that are the most efficient. And to talk more in depth about that, I will give the floor to my colleague, Andrea.
Thank you. And Marc-André, I think you're right by checking all of these boxes when it comes to reducing emissions from the light-duty vehicle sector. So at Équiterre, of course, we are very, very concerned about the rise in GHG emissions from that sector. And so this last section will mostly focus on ways to make sure that we reach our climate targets. So first of all, is there hope? Are we destined to see the size of our vehicles grow forever? I think not. Well, the other slide, please. I think there is a missing slide. I'm sorry about that. What you are supposed to see is the footprint and weight of vehicles, which Canadian vehicles have the largest footprint and weigh a lot. Basically, we are world champions in that, so it makes us look very good on the international stage. So this is the starting point for today's analysis. We can move on and see how in which other sectors we are also champions. So there is the fuel consumption per vehicle, CO2 emissions per kilometer that are driven, the vehicle size and weight, and the overall vehicle footprint, as I mentioned. So this is, of course, due to the famous, to the now infamous transformation of the car fleet that has been observed in recent years, and which we've talked about abundantly here. So as a reminder, I just want to pinpoint several things that explain this. So there's the price of gasoline that is too low, and so it doesn't have the necessary influence on people's behavior and consumer choices. And next, we also have the attractive financing terms, that are available for the purchase of larger vehicles, despite their higher price. Brigitte just talked about that. The lack of public awareness on the individual, but also the collective costs associated with these vehicles, and the fact that their features are very attracting to a lot of people. Well, these are very good points, but there is also a key issue that needs to be addressed if we are going to reduce significantly the GHG emissions from the light duty vehicle sector. So there's these regulations basically are very important because they now have obvious perverse effects. They have major loopholes in them, and they are keeping us, they are one of the causes for this fleet transformation, and they are keeping us from working towards our climate targets, basically. So these regulations were adopted in 2010, and they were tied to that of the United States in 2012. It's a system based on credits that automakers need to gather for model years. So these regulations have very commendable goals, which are to improve the monitoring of emissions and to encourage the use of greener and cleaner technologies. It is also the only supply side regulation in place to meet our GHG reduction targets right now. So that's why they are very, very important, and we need to focus on them. So if we move on to the next slide, these regulations are powerful policy tools because, some of you probably know that Canada has a new climate target, which is to reduce its emissions by 30 to 45% under 2005 levels, And achieving this target will require massive GHG reductions in road transport. We were already not on track before to meet our target. So now that we have this regulation, that is a good starting point. We need to make sure that it brings us towards this new, more ambitious target. So before going any further, I'd like to remind you that Canada and Quebec have important climate commitments. So Canada has announced a new target for 2030, as I mentioned, but it's also aiming for net zero by 2050. So what we see is that light duty trucks and the ever bigger size of vehicles is canceling out the GHG reductions that are supposed to be achieved. So if we move on to the next slide, the light duty vehicle emission regulations are quite complex, but I'll try to make it as simple as I can. First, they are based on the average footprint of vehicles, not their weight, and they are therefore less stringent for vehicles with a larger footprint. Why? Because by manufacturing larger vehicles, the overall CO2 emission standard also increases since it is set as the average of these limits. So what does it mean? What it means is that it becomes less demanding to make larger, more polluting vehicles. So there is a direct link to the increase in light duty trucks relating to that regulations. And so these current standards allow about 1/3 more emissions, which obviously delays the GHG reductions. And this is because the potential for innovation and energy efficiency gains are reduced. And well, I'm going to stop here on that note. On the right, on the same slide, you can see that the energy efficiency of light duty trucks by 2025 will be equivalent to that of cars in 2018. So despite the energy efficiency gains that all cars have, it's obvious that this trend is slowing us down in terms of transitioning towards the carbon-free society that we all want. So let's move on to how we can fix this problem. Here are our recommendations around vehicle emissions regulations. The loopholes are shown on the screen. So first, we suggest to increase the stringency of emission standards. It's essential to establish an overall limit, not an average limit on the CO2 emissions from light duty vehicles. This would imply that there would be no distinction between light duty trucks and smaller vehicles in the regulations. The new limit, which needs to be ambitious for the post-2025 period, obviously, would be applied to all manufacturers, regardless of the size and weight of the vehicles that are sold. And this way, we would be able to slow automakers from only making micro adjustments to the most polluting vehicles. Second, we suggest the to limit the flexibility around compliance credits. So this is related to the previous recommendation acting on the lack of stringency. And that would mean that it would be more difficult for automakers to offset the sales of larger models with more fuel efficient models, such as hybrid and electric models, basically. And third, we need to reform the off-cycle credit system. So basically what this is that automakers can currently earn credits if they improve things that are that are not the fuel consumption, like for example, air conditioning. So obviously rewarding the industry for such changes is important, but maybe not as important and maybe not as efficient if we want to really work towards our climate reduction targets in general. So again, I'm bringing back the idea of making sure that automakers don't only make micro adjustments to the most polluting vehicles. So I want to finish with the complementary solutions because yes, these GHG emission regulations are key, but there's really not just that. This is my favorite part. So what would allow us to work efficiently towards our GHG emissions target? Well, I wanna talk about what Catherine and Brigitte just talked about, so which is the issue of the number of vehicles that is key. But once that's said, and what can we do to reduce their size in general? Well, I think that increased carbon pricing is a direct application of the polluter pays principle. So that means that the price would be directly reflected in higher gas prices. Right now, what we see is that the penalty is insufficient, is not sufficient to bring consumer behavior change. And in 2021, polluting should not be nearly free, right? The next is the implementation of a fee-based system. So this is a great proposal because it also touches people's wallets directly. It also frees up a lot of money to accelerate the ecological transition. So what's fun about it, I'm going to say fun because I really like this policy. It's a self-funding system. So in fact, right now, hundreds of millions of dollars, even billions, are spent on subsidies for electric vehicles. But what if this system, what if this money could be reused for other projects in our ecological transition? Well, we could do that with a fee-based system. Next, a scrappage program is becoming more and more common around the world. And these programs, basically, they offer subsidies for the purchase of a fuel and efficient vehicle when we remove a polluting vehicle from the road. This principle could also apply to someone who wants to buy an e-bike instead of a car, and they would also benefit from a subsidy from the government. France has such a system, which is really which is really cool. And the other two, I've already talked about it, but of course, the advertising practices need to be aligned with our government targets, climate targets. And we also need to work on raising awareness among consumers in order to make more informed, but also more sustainable transportation choices. Thank you.
All right. So we're arriving at the end of this this webinar. I would like to thank you. Well, thank you so much, Andréane, for this presentation. That was very insightful. As I said before, all we need now is our government is for our government to take action. I'll repeat that there are elections coming. We hope that they will put some ideas forward that will allow us to take action on this problem. As we've seen, it's a problem. The success of some of these measures is already recognized in other countries. So let's get inspired here and let's put the best policies in place. As I mentioned earlier, I have Darth Vader and a son looking over my shoulder, but looking over all panelists' shoulders. There's two amazing person, Julie Christine and Damaris, who you don't see, but who work hard in the shadows of Zoom. They've been gathering your questions during the webinar. They've been helping us with the logistics. So thank you very much for your amazing work. I've seen that, I know that some of the questions have already been answered, but I see that there are more questions coming in. Ingrid and Charlotte, our collaborators from Cyrano and HSC Montréal, are with us for the exchange. So let's chat. I see that we have a first question here. Question is, I don't see car shares taking off. It might be fine for the most dedicated or ultra urban downtown use, but to my earlier point, wearing the car that literally everyone else wears is a difficult proposal. And that is all outside of COVID type concerns. How clean is the community car? I'm about to get in. So maybe Andréane?
Well, regarding the COVID-19 issue, I think that if you follow the sanitary measures that are recommended, there shouldn't be any problem. As of right now, for example, in the public transit, there was no case of eclosion, if that's the right word. But outbreak, thank you, that's it. So car sharing is, well, I think that, well, it definitely has to. It has to take off. There are various ways to help it. But, well, I think I'm pretty sure that Catherine Morancy would like to add something about that aspect. Because we mentioned it, we talked about it. We need to stop the number of cars on the roads from rising. So in that regard,
I'm not in the right position to talk, but I can add one thing. Communato has seen an increase in the number of members. So I think this is worth noticing that car sharing is not losing members, it's increasing its membership. And actually, we also see new markets because people have car surplus. Cars used to be parked 95% of the time, and now they are parked more often because of the pandemic. And if you see teleworking scenarios moving forward after the pandemic, then maybe household who have more cars than, have more than one car will reconsider their level of ownership. So I haven't heard any concerns with respect to car sharing for those who use it, and I've heard increased membership. So I think this is worth noticing.
I can also add to this point, I've done a study with Kominoto around the end of last year, beginning of this year. We've also seen that people were using it more, and when we were asking the users, so Kominoto asked us specifically to include questions about the hygiene measures, and users were actually quite satisfied with them. So there were no preoccupations regarding health issues or hygiene issues in the shared cars.
Okay, so it seems like we have another question about the ZEV mandate. The question is, what about a national ZEV mandate for 2035 or earlier? Washington State has just adopted a ZEV mandate for 2030 in conjunction with an aggressive scrappage program. I know that there are conditions attached to what they've adopted, but let's hear about, I guess, Andréane would like to say a word about national ZEV mandate.
I would love to say a word about that. So a ZEV standard is definitely a policy that we advocate for and that should be implemented. The reason why it wasn't included here in our presentation is simply because, well, the objective is to accelerate the uptake of ZEVs. Its objective is not to slow down the purchase of large vehicles. So that's why our focus was not on it, but it's definitely a measure that we need to implement soon because right now the waiting lists for ZEVs are super long. They're not evenly distributed among the countries, and there are tons of things to say about the uptake of ZEVs, but it was really just about focusing on the policies addressing the rise in the size of the vehicles.
Thank you, Andréane. I see another question here in the Q&A chat box. How do you break down which recommendations fall under federal and which fall under provincial jurisdiction?
We did this, how can I explain that? So transportation is not, it's by the Constitution, and in the Constitution, you don't have a specific category for transportation, which means that any government can bring up law depending on their own others jurisdiction. In the case of cars, if we go, the sale of cars is a product of sale, which is imported good, so it's federal laws. But if you are looking at the impact of the car, for example, the Ghg emission is a share between the federal and the provincial government. And if you think about the position of the car, it's in the side of the provincial government. So it's really, it's why the vehicles are really not well encadré juridiquement, je cherche le mot.
Regulated?
Yeah, it's really not well regulated because it's really, all the competency are really distributed between the government. But it's a complex question and we have a whole chapter on that if you want to read it.
We'll definitely take a look at this chapter, that's for sure. Do we see any other questions? I don't think so, not for the moment. And we're coming towards the end anyway of the 2 hours that are dedicated to this webinar. So I guess it will be time for me to wrap this up. If you have any further questions or comment, feel free to email the participants. I'm guessing that you'll have, you can see in the chat there was the email address where you can send your questions or your comments if you have further questions or comments, and we'll be happy to reply to these questions and comments when in due time. So thank you very much for your attendance and participation. Thanks to our generous panelists for their time. The recording and slide deck of this webinar will be sent to you in the coming days. Stay tuned for the series of report that we will be releasing, and see you next time. Thank you.